Hi students, welcome to my channel. In this channel we provide the in-depth knowledge of different programming languages like C, C++, Java, Python, etc. which differentiate you with others. In our series of Java programming, we have already uploaded n number of lectures. In that series, we are loading another lecture in which we discuss about constructor. This is very important topic. Try to concentrate on each and every line we are discussing in this class. So the topic of this lecture is object creation using constructors. Now what is class? That we have already discussed in the previous lectures. Class is a user defined data type. A class contains data and methods that operate upon data. What does a class contain? A class contains data and methods, and these methods always operate upon data. Both data and methods can be private or public, which essentially decide the access to the data and the function within the class. So what is private and public? These are known as access specifier, which essentially decides the access to the data and the function within the class. Let's try to understand what are constructors, what are the uses of constructors, how constructor helps us in the programming. So before understanding what is constructor, let's try to discuss one program. Here we are having import java.util.asterisk class num. We have declared one class called num, in which we are having one private data member, that is private int I. What is private here? Private is an access specifier. What is int here? Int is a data type and I is a data member name. Then with the help of set data, we are trying to initialize this I, public void set data int j I equal to j. So means set data will receive one value from the main function and this j will be initialized to a. Nothing special about main function. The function means anybody can call this set data, from where this function will be called, one value will be passed and that value will be initialized to I. Then we are having one get data method in which we are scanning one value from the user with the help of scanner class, scanner scn. What is scn? Scn is a reference of a scanner class, and scanner class is a part of java.util package. Now what is package? That we will discuss in your further classes. Then scn is equal to new scanner system.in. So we are passing that stream system.in in a parameter when we create an object of a scanner class, that we have already discussed in the first class of Java. If anybody has any doubt regarding scanner class, go and watch that video. Scn is equal to new scanner system.in, then system.out.println, enter an integer, then I is equal to scn.nextInt. So it will ask one value from the user and user will enter that value from the keyboard and that value should be initialized to I. Then we are having public num, then we are having public num int k. So these are constructors. Okay, we will discuss just few minutes after. Then public void display data. Display data is displaying the value of I. System.out.println, value of I is plus I. Then public class number. In number class we are having public static void main. Java program always start executing from the opening brace of main and terminates with the closing brace of main. We are talking about Java application. We are not talking about Java applets. Then public static void main string str. In main function, what we are doing, we are creating three references of num n1, n2 and n3. What is n1, n2, n3? These are the references of the num class. Then n1 is equal to new num, n1.display data, n1.set data, n1.display data. So as you write n1 is equal to new data, so that I will be initialized with 0, then n1.display data you will get 0 here, then n1.set data, set data method will be called and 200 will be received in this set data and that 200 will be initialized to I. Then if I try to write n1.display data, so I will get the output 200. This is the first method to set data in object. Okay, So there are three ways in which we can initialize the data. First one is using set data method. Then n2 is equal to new num, n2 is dot display, n2 dot get data, n2 dot display. Here this is a second method to set data in the object. Then what happens? As you write n2 dot get data will be called and will prompt one message, enter the value, and the user will enter the value from the keyboard. Then whatever the value will be scanned by the user, that will be displayed with the n2 dot display data. Now problem with this approach is, in both the case, whether we are initializing the value by passing the parameters or by using scanning the values from the user, in both the case we have to make an explicit call to the method set data and get data. Now do you agree with this point? Suppose we are having one number class in which we are having int I as a data member. Now that number class is having one factorial function, or you can take an example of this only. Here we are having display data. Now if I am forget to call this n1 dot set data or n2 dot set get data, now if I write n1 dot display data, what I will get? I will not get the desired result. Why we are not getting the desired result? Because we forget to call the set data and get data, which are the methods which is used to initialize the data member of a class. Now what common sense says कि before making any call to the member function, that object should be totally initialized so that member function or a method should work on that data. Suppose if I write num n1 is equal to new num. What is num? Num is a user defined class. In that I is having one data member. That I should be properly initialized before making a call to the member function of the num class. Now if I write I dot fact, what is fact? Fact is a member function or I is a method of num class which is calculating the factorial of a number. Now until or unless that I is initialized, I can be initialized either using set data or get data, but in both the cases these methods are called explicitly by the user, and we cannot give the assurance that user will call fact after get data or set data. User can directly write num n1 is equal to new num n dot factorial. Then what happens? You will get the undesired result. But object oriented programming says there is a special type of method or a special type of member function which invokes automatically whenever an object is created. Now with the help of this approach, whenever an object is created under any object oriented programming language, whether it's a C++ or Java or Python or X or JavaScript, make it very clear it's a rule. Whenever an object is created, a special kind of member function of that class is implicitly invoked, which is used to initialize the data member of that class implicitly, and that member function is known as constructor. Now how the compiler will know in Java? Because we are learning Java, we should stick to Java. Now in Java, if any if any member function is having the same name as a class name, so that member function becomes the constructor of a class. See here we are having a class name called num. Fine. Now this is having set data, which is used to initialize the data, then get data, again used to initialize the data, then we are having public num. Now what is num here? Num is a member function. If a class name and a member function name is same, so this member function becomes the constructor of a class. What is constructor? Constructor is a special kind of member function or a method which is implicitly or automatically invoked whenever an object is created. तो जब भी ऑब्जेक्ट क्रिएट होगा तो ये कंस्ट्रक्टर इन्वोक हो जाएगा. नाउ यू कैन राइट आई इक्वल टू 0 हियर. नाउ यू कैन एश्योर दैट कि इफ यूजर विल नॉट कॉल दिस सेट डेटा और गेट डेटा मेथड, एटलीस्ट ही विल गेट सम 0 वैल्यू, because in this constructor you have written I equal to 0. No doubt with the help with the constructors we can have set data, we can have get data also. Getting my point? Because what rule says कि before calling any member function on an object, that object is properly created. Properly created means the data member of that object should be properly initialize. Why? Because this method always work on what? Data member of a object only. Object consists of what? Data members. They are not containing member functions na. They only contains what? Data member. And if I write object dot factorial, so what you want to do? You want to calculate the factorial which is of the data which is available in that object obj. So that object data should be properly initialized before making a function called factorial. Getting my point? So what ऑब्जेक्ट ओरिएंटेड प्रोग्रामिंग सेज कि whenever an object is created, उन्होंने एक रूल बना दिया कि whenever an object is created, a special kind of member function should be automatically or implicitly invoked, that is known as constructor, which is used to initialize the data member of a class. Now how the compiler will differentiate a member function and a constructor function? If a function name and a class name is same, so that member function becomes the constructor of that class. Simply, if a member function name and a class name is same, so that member function becomes the constructor of a class. So here we are having public num, opening closing parenthesis, opening closing brace. I can write I equal to 0 here, no issues. I can write I equal to 0 here. Now what happens? Whenever an object is created, now I can assure that I will be initialized with 0. Okay, now we are having two functions with the num name. So this is an example of what? This is an example of function overloading. Two member function with same name but different parameters is an example of what? It's a function overloading. But these are not function, these are what? These are constructor. So these are called constructor overloading. We are overloading the constructors. Getting my point? Now next question that arise in our mind कि सर अभी तक तो हम ऐसा कोई भी फंक्शन नहीं डाल रहे थे, क्योंकि आप एक तरफ क्या बोल रहे हो कि whenever an object is created that method must be invoked. Whenever an object is created, a constructor function must be invoked. But till date we are not putting any constructor inside the class. If there is no constructor in the class, how that function will be invoked? The answer to this question is, if you are not inserting any constructor inside the class, compiler automatically insert one null constructor or a zero argument constructor, because that rule is final. What? Ki whenever an object is created, a special kind of member function called constructor is implicitly or automatically invoked whenever an object is created. अब जब इन्वोक होगा तब वो उसको होना भी चाहिए, और अगर आप इंसर्ट नहीं करोगे तो कंपाइलर ऑटोमेटिकली इंसर्ट करेगा, जो आज तक करते आ रहा है. बिकॉज कंस्ट्रक्टर तो आप आज पढ़ रहे हो ना, बट वी आर लर्निंग जावा फ्रॉम लास्ट 1 month. Getting my point? We have already created a number of classes, but we never put constructor inside the class. So who is inserting that constructor? Compiler is inserting that constructor inside the class. So again it's a rule, if you are not inserting any constructor inside a class, compiler will insert one null constructor. Another rule is what? If you are inserting the constructor inside the class, compiler will not insert any constructor. It's a duty of, suppose you are inserting one argument constructor, so compiler will not insert null constructor. It's a duty of the programmer to insert that null constructor inside the class. So moral of the story is, either you insert it or I insert it. I means compiler. या तो सारे कंस्ट्रक्टर आप ही इंसर्ट कीजिए, अगर आप इंसर्ट नहीं कर रहे हो तो एक जीरो आर्गुमेंट कंस्ट्रक्टर मैं इंसर्ट कर दूंगा कि वो जो ऑब्जेक्ट क्रिएट होगा तो वो इम्प्लिसिटली कॉल होगा. तो हियर वी आर हैविंग टू कंस्ट्रक्टर्स विद द सेम नेम. नेम तो सेम होगा क्योंकि पहला ही रूल क्या है, दैट नेम शुड बी सेम. Then only compiler will able to differentiate कि this is a simple member function and this is a constructor member function. So here we are having two constructors. One is zero argument constructor and second is one argument constructor. How they are invoked, that we will see in few minutes. Getting my point? So what is constructor? Constructor is a special kind of member function which invokes implicitly or automatically whenever an object is created. Usually constructors are used to initialize the data member of a class. What common sense says कि before making any function call, on the object, that object should be properly initialized, then only there is some use of calling that member function on that object. So we are having set data and get data to initialize the data member of a class. But the problem with this approach is both the member functions are called explicitly by the programmer, and there may be a chance of error. To overcome that error, compiler insert one null constructor to initialize that data member properly. Getting my point? See here. Now, when I write n2 is equal to new num, here we are creating an object. As we have already gone through what? Whenever an object is created under any object oriented programming language, a special kind of member function called constructor must be invoked. So when I write n2 is equal to new num, we are passing how many arguments? 0 argument. So 0 argument constructor will be invoked. And when I write n3 is equal to new num 100, what happens? 1 argument constructor will be invoked. And when I write n3 is equal to new num 100 comma 2, what happens? It will flash an error. Why? Because we are trying to call 2 argument constructor inside the class. This is not possible. Why? Because we have not inserted any 2 argument constructor inside the class. Same. Suppose if I write n1.display data 10. So which function will be invoked? It will flash an error. Why? Because we are not having any display data with 1 argument. We are passing 0 argument. Same thing. When I write n2 is equal to new num, 0 argument constructor will be invoked. When I write n3 is equal to new num 100, 1 argument constructor will be invoked. When I write n3 is equal to new num 100 comma 2, it will flash an error, mismatch arguments. Here we are passing 2 arguments and we are receiving in 1 argument. So either you remove this or you define one more. See here, Control C, Control V, and here we can write int p, and this is 2 argument constructor. How many constructor we can have in a class? It depends upon the program. At least you should have one. You can have n number of constructor. Now in this program we are having 3 constructor. One is 0 argument constructor or null constructor. One or the same thing. 0 argument constructor or a null constructor, and 1 argument constructor and 2 argument constructor. Okay. Now when I write n4 is equal to new num 100 comma 2, though this constructor function will be invoked. So in that case you will not get an error. So when I write num n1 comma n2 comma n3, how many constructor will be invoked? No constructor will be invoked. Why? Because here we are not creating any object in this statement. Because we have already learned in Java that until or unless you write a new keyword, object is not created under Java. New is the only option through which you can create an object. So n1, n2, n3 are what? These are references. These are references. So when I write num n1 comma n2 comma n3, n1 equal to new num, 0 argument constructor is invoked. When I write n2 is equal to num 100, 1 argument constructor will be invoked. Okay, n3 dot display data, it will display the output. So what we are getting, value of I is 0, value of I is 200, value of I is 0, enter the integer, we are entering 63, we are getting the output 63 and 100. Now let's discuss these nodes. We have already discussed, we are just reading it out. See, the above program shows 3 ways to initialize the object. One through set data, to whom we pass the value to be set up. Another way is by receiving values through keyboard using get data method, and the third way which uses an entity called constructor. What is constructor? A constructor is a special kind of member method or a member function that allows us to set up a values while creating an object without the need to make a separate call to the member method like set data or get data. So what is constructor? Constructor is a special kind of member that allows us to set up a values while creating an object without the need to make a separate call to the member method like set data, and thus constructor is a special kind of member function which is automatically or implicitly called whenever an object is created, that we have already discussed. Now let's discuss some unusual aspects of constructor. Now, in fact, it's a rule that the class and the constructor function within it must have the same name. This is how the compiler knows that the member function is a constructor function. In fact, it's a rule that the class and the constructor function within it must have the same name. This is how the compiler knows that the member function is a constructor function. No return type is used for constructor. Why not? Since constructor is implicitly called whenever an object is created, returning a value would not make any sense. Because where you receive the value, where you make a function call, and you never call the constructor explicitly. Constructors are always called implicitly or automatically. और जब वो implicitly और automatically call होंगे, तो returning a value would not make any sense. अगर वो रिटर्न करेगा भी तो वेयर यू विल रिसीव, फ्रॉम वेयर यू शुड कॉल, और जब कॉल ही नहीं कर रहे हो तो रिटर्न करने का कोई सेंस ही नहीं बनता. दैट इज वाई व्हाट वी हैव रिटन, नो रिटर्न टाइप इज यूज्ड फॉर कंस्ट्रक्टर. व्हाई नॉट? सिंस द कंस्ट्रक्टर इज इम्प्लिसिटली कॉल्ड व्हेनेवर एन ऑब्जेक्ट इज क्रिएटेड, रिटर्निंग वैल्यू वुड नॉट मेक एनी सेंस. n1 equal to new num calls zero argument constructor, n2 is equal to new num calls zero argument constructor, and n3 is equal to new num 100 calls one argument constructor. Getting my point? I think this completes our constructor. So you have to remember, moral of this story is you have to remember 2-3 things about constructors. There are different ways to initialize the data member of a class. No doubt it's a common sense before making any member function call on an object, that object should be properly initialized. That can be initialized by passing the value from the function or by getting the value from the keyboard. But in both the approaches, what happens, these functions are called explicitly, and there may be chance that we forget to call this method explicitly, and if you call any member function without initializing the data member, you will get the undesired result. So what object oriented programming says कि there is a special kind of member function. First rule उन्होंने क्या बना दिया कि whenever an object is created, a special kind of member function called constructor should implicitly invoked or automatically invoked to initialize the data member of a class. How in Java, how compiler identifies is it's a constructor function. If a member function name and a class name is same, so that member function becomes the constructor of a class. We can overload the constructor by changing the arguments. Here we have overloaded twice. In one we are passing 0 argument, and in one we are passing 1 argument. Some unusual aspects of constructor is class and constructor function within it must have the same name. This is how the compiler knows that the member function is a constructor. No return type is used for constructor. Even you cannot write void also. No return type is used for constructor. Why not? Since constructor is implicitly called, returning a value would not make any sense. Getting my point? Any doubt you can ask me, otherwise we should stop here. Go through this program. This is very important and very basic, but at least you should know why we are using constructors, how Java identifies that this member function is a constructor. Okay, what is the use of constructor? Constructor नहीं होते तो क्या होता? That is why the topic of today's lecture is object creation using constructor. I think we should stop here. If you like the content of this channel, please like, share as much you can. It motivates us. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.